The Green Revolution brought modern technology and irrigation to India in an attempt at rural development, where the goal was to get uh, crop yields, specifically on wheat and rice, up to the levels of the Western countries. And it happened in the 60s and thereon. And the place where it's been most successful has been where we are standing in Punjab in India.
By the 1950, India's food production was barely keeping up with population growth. In fact, from a series of droughts in the late 50s and the early 60s meant that India was dependent for food on PL 480 food aid from the US, which came with plenty of strings attached.
It's transformed now because of the Green Revolution and because of the pricing policies of the procurement pricing policies of the central government of India into a predominantly rice and wheat culture, where rice is grown in the summer and wheat is grown in the winter.
So around about 30 to 50% of all of India's rice for the public distribution system is supplied by Punjab. Punjab therefore is a very important player in food security for the poor in both rice and wheat.
Punjab's rainfall varies from the hills to the southwest towards Pakistan, from about 15 centimeters a year to about 70 to 80 centimeters a year. And there's quite a significant gradient that results from that. The water consumed by the crops that are planted now, rice and wheat, requires about 1.2 to 1.5 meters of water depending on where you are in the state. So clearly there's an imbalance between what comes in and what's being taken out. So the net result is that they are mining groundwater in the area, and you have a rate of drop of about, on average, around a meter per year.
Rainfall in Punjab is usually quite variable. Therefore, even the long-term average itself can be quite misleading. However, assuming that 600 to 700 mm is the long-term average, the past 5 years, especially since the early 2000s, the average rainfall has been around 500 mm. So the average rainfall has declined by about 200 mm, which is about 30% decline, which is quite substantial.
Most of the water that falls as rain goes in to recharge the very shallow aquifer, which is the top 15 to 30 feet of the aquifer. So that water in that area is perhaps a couple of years old or 5 years old. As you go deeper below the first clay layer, you are starting to look at water that's 100 to 1,000 years old. And the depths at which they are pumping from now is consistent with that. So if you go to the next aquifer below, which is what essentially they seem to be shooting for, you're looking at water that's 1,000 to 10,000 years old. What that says is that now you're extracting water that's quite a bit older, and you're not going to be able to replace this. This is mining at its finest.
If electricity is free, as is currently true, farmers have no incentive, even if they did have subsidies on technology, to save water. Since it is absolutely free of cost, there is no incentive to save it.
There are places in India where it's dropping even faster. And for example, we are working in Gujarat, in North Gujarat, in a place called Mehsana. These people are dropping at 3 to 5 meters per year. In the recent period, it slowed down because of better rain. But overall, there are many places there that are now pumping from 250 to 350 meters below ground, and they are right near the ocean. So this is not the worst, but this is the most spectacular in the sense that this is the breadbasket of India. Gujarat is not.
Now, this is not unique to India either. For instance, large parts of semi-arid United States, especially Australia, and large parts of northern and western China are also facing an immense groundwater depletion problem.
In our surveys, what we have found is that the majority of the farmers do understand that this is related to cultivation of rice, which was not done in the past, and the water usage associated with the pumping. But quite a few of them do respond that they think it's because the rains are not as good as they once used to be. So the perception issues are still a factor. The ones who have experienced greater drawdowns seem to understand what's going on. The ones who have not experienced as much drawdown because they are near canals and they hence get recharged from the canals don't seem to appreciate it.
जैसे पानी डूंगा जा रहा है ना ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਤਲਬ ਪਾਣੀ ਘੱਟ ਤੇ ਪਾਵਰ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਲੱਗੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਦਿਨੋਂ ਦਿਨ ਪਾਣੀ ਘਟੀ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਪੰਪ ਵੱਡੇ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਪੰਪ
It's quite deep. It's at 100 feet also. It's 120. But normally when they do boring, they go up to 200, 250, 300 level because the clear drinking water, potable water is available at that level.
अभी तो दिन ब दिन बहुत मुश्किल आ रही है पानी के लिए क्योंकि आने वाले समय ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ एक तो बहुत ही प्रॉब्लम आ रही है जो बिजली है पंजाब सरकार से वो भी हमको पूरी उपलब्ध नहीं हो रही और जो पानी की सतह है वो भी दिन ब दिन नीचे जा रही है इसलिए जो फार्मर है बहुत प्रॉब्लम में है
In Punjab, in the summer, especially in central Punjab, about 80% of cropped area is under rice. Rice is a crop that is flood irrigated, i.e. requires standing water. That is the main reason for extraction of water in central Punjab.
Electricity here is highly subsidized. It's not at a metered price, so they're free to use as much as they want, which they have been. And that's one of the reasons the water levels are dropping. But since they drop, the well goes dry and then they have to deepen it and they experience that expense. Typically in the region we are standing in, farmers have deepened their wells 5 to 10 times in the last 15 years. And now what they are starting to do is to deepen well beyond what they need to go to so that they don't have to incur the same expense repeatedly.
The impact on prices, food prices, especially of rice and wheat, of depletion of groundwater is a complex issue. However, one thing is obvious. If Punjab's production falls, then the price of rice and especially of wheat goes up.
There are people who argue that in 10 to 20 years the groundwater will effectively vanish from here. That's not true, but it'll get deeper and deeper. And currently the burden on the state exchequer for subsidizing the energy cost is high. They will simply not be able to sustain any public infrastructure in this entire state. The Columbia Water Center was set up specifically to look at global water issues. And the mandate we have is to understand the evolution of global water scarcity in particular, and to come up with ways by which we can address these issues. We have a number of grants. The largest of those is one due to the PepsiCo Foundation, and they are supporting us to look at specific places in the world to understand what really are the issues on the ground. So that instead of just looking at large-scale models of global water scarcity, we can try to understand things specifically. So these places are China, India, Brazil, and Mali. And in addition to that, we have projects in Ethiopia, various parts of the United States, Indonesia, and other parts of the developing world.
The Columbia Water Center's project in Punjab is really about increasing efficiency of water use in rice, as well as to look at various methods of diversification of crops in central Punjab.
You have to improve the productivity in agriculture in terms of water use and energy use. You can reduce the area under rice by 20 to 30%. You can grow different crops in lieu of that. That'll get quite a bit of benefit. You can bring in sprinkler systems. You can bring in drip irrigation in growing those crops. And actually, the interesting thing is that the farmer who grows rice wheat is essentially taking the certainty equivalent in the gamble, because that's what the government is doing for them. But they make less money on average, dramatically less money than the people who are engaged in high cash value crops. The high cash value crop person can make 10 times the money the rice wheat person does in a year, or half the money. That's the gamble that that person takes. So if one could address that gamble through either insurance mechanisms on price risk or contract farming, then the solution is right there.
ये प्रॉब्लम तो हम कैसे सॉल्व करें, ये तो ज़्यादा तो पंजाब गवर्नमेंट का भी इसमें कुछ इन्वॉल्व होना चाहिए और हमारे ज़िम्मेदारों को भी इसमें इन्वॉल्व होना चाहिए कि कैसे इसकी पानी की जो बचत है कैसे करनी है, और ऐसे कैंप्स लगाएं जो ज़िम्मेदारों को पता चले भी कैसे इसकी जो बचत है वो कैसे हो.
What's hitting us at a global population of 6.8 billion is that primary resources that we need, land and water, for a population of that size to sustain itself, we are running out of. And water more so than land at the present time, because the primary need that we have is food for all people and safe drinking water, of course. But the agriculture in the world, averaged across all countries, consumes about 70% of the freshwater resources that are used. In places like India, Punjab, for example, Nepal, Bangladesh, and China, the number is closer to 90 to 95%. So, really, the dominant water story in terms of concerns from for carrying capacity of the world is that of growing food, and we need fresh water to do that. There is much attention heaped on climate change issues, and indeed that's a very important issue for sustainability at the planetary scale. But most of the impacts that we are concerned about are 50 to 100 years out, and there's considerable uncertainty about every aspect of climate change. How much CO2 we will continue to emit, what energy sources we will use, how we will capture CO2, and also on the climate dynamic side, how much ice might melt, how much rainfall patterns will change, and so forth. On the other hand, with regard to water scarcity directly, there is very little uncertainty. In many, many parts of the world, where agriculture is intensively practiced. This includes the Midwestern United States. This includes California, the major agricultural regions of the world. This includes the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia. In all of these places, we are looking at a scenario where in the next 15 to 25 years, we are in dire straits. So I have no intention of diminishing attention away from climate change, but the real issue that we are facing is one of water scarcity. The problem of water scarcity, which relates to food security, is a global carrying capacity issue, and it reverberates from the poorer countries in the world, which are large consumers of grains, to the richer countries because of the price shocks that will engender themselves as soon as these issues become manifest. If you look across the board, this impact will be felt everywhere, because in the richer countries, for example in the United States, the inflation that took place over the last 2 or 3 years was related only in part, fractionally actually, to the price of gasoline going up. It was more dramatically related to increasing hunger in America, in the poorer segments of America, not being able to provide food. And if I take Southern Europe, where similar things have been happening, what you see is that problems that the developed countries have not thought about for a long time will suddenly emerge as important and maybe politically threatening for them.